All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second session, our second class in the Psalms in Hebrew and comparative translations. Welcome to everybody who joined us last week and the first time this week, also welcome. My thought in this class was that we would do one psalm a week, which now that we've done one psalm, actually feels like maybe a pace that I don't know if we can keep up. But
we'll take a year.
But we're going to try, at least for the first little while. For those of you who were with us last week or who watched the recording, we didn't get to everything about the first psalm, and that was in the packet that I prepared, let alone any more thoughts that we might have had, which there definitely could have been. I think we're also going to find that Psalm 2 is a challenge, and these are not long psalms. So I said, I will have to play it by ear and see how it feels. But I just want to reiterate something I said at the top last time, which is, when it came to teaching Parashat HaShavua, when it came to teaching the weekly Torah portion, which is what I have been teaching in my Tuesday morning class for the last 3 years, I feel like I'm an expert on the weekly Torah portion because of my years of study and my study of biblical commentaries on Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. I feel very confident in my mastery of that material. And I do not feel the same way about Psalms. With Psalms, I feel like I am an explorer in Psalms with you. And every week as I prepare for the class and find commentaries and interesting comparative translations, interesting things to say and to explore, to ask questions to ask about the Psalms, I feel that I am also learning, and I don't feel like I'm bringing a sense of expertise or mastery to this. I feel like I'm bringing, I'm hopeful that we will all learn together. And the purpose of studying Psalms, to me, is to explore some of this biblical poetry with the hope that it enhances our spiritual lives. So when there are moments in the Psalms that connect to our prayers, I'd like to bring them to share the intertexts with our prayer service. We use this verse from Psalms in this liturgical context, and that's spiritually meaningful. And now that we're looking at the whole Psalm, how does it change our understanding of that phrase that we know from our prayer service? So that's a big part of what I want to do. And then also, Psalms, like any poetry, should speak to the heart. And so everybody can be spiritually uplifted or can connect to the Psalms in their own way. So, and it's my hope that we are able to then share a conversation and discussion about each Psalm in a way that we're all learning from each other. So, before we jump into Psalm 2, if anybody is holding on to something very passionately from last week and really wants to share, I wanted to open the floor to anybody to just offer a reflection or a thought from Psalm 1.
No. Thank you.
All right, I'll just say that where Psalm 1 is quoted in our liturgy, Psalm 2 is not quoted in our liturgical canon in the Jewish tradition. And as we're going to see as we go through, my understanding is that Psalm 2 is actually much more quoted and much more prevalent in the Christian community than it is in the Jewish community. And we're going to look at some of that, which is just, it's, you know, there are 150 Psalms. We don't do all of them as part of our liturgical canon. And it's interesting to see which ones different traditions have really uplifted. And so like last week, I'd like to begin just by reading the Psalm out loud in Hebrew. And then we're going to jump into our comparative translations. So here we go. Lama ragshu goyim uleumim yehegu rik, yityatzvu malchei eretz, v'roznim nosedu yachad al Adonai ve'al Meshicho. Ninatka et mosrotemo, v'nashlicha mimenu avotemo, yoshev bashamayim yischak, Adonai yil'ag lamo. Az yidaber elemo be'apo, uvacharono yivhalemo. Va'ani nasachti malki al Zion har kochi. Asapira el chok Adonai, Amar Eli bini ata, ani hayom yilidticha. Sha'al mimeni ve'etna goyim nachalatecha, v'achuzatecha afsei aretz. Tiroim b'shevet barzel, kichli yotzer tinaptzem. Ve'ata melachim haskilu, hivasru shofetei aretz. Ivdu et Adonai b'yirah, v'gilu bir'ada. Nashku var pen yenaf vitovdu derech ki yivar kimat apo ashrei kol chosevo. Actually, before we jump right into the comparative translation, I wanted to bring one of our commentaries, which is from the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, the section that deals with blessings, folio 9b. And I've titled this One Psalm or Two. Okay, so there is an opinion in the Babylonian Talmud following a discussion about the use of the word ashrei, the use of the word happy in Psalms, which that's what they're discussing on page 9b. It says, rather conclude from this that happy is the man and why are the nations in uproar constitute a single portion. Okay, so that's another way of saying Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are really one psalm. Additional proof that these two chapters comprise a single portion is cited from what Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, that Rabbi Yochanan said. Every chapter that was dear to David, he began with happy is and concluded with happy is. He opened with happy is, as it is written, Ashrei Ha'ish Asher Lo Halach, right? The happy is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked. That's last week's psalm. And he concluded with happy, as it is written in the end of this chapter, pay homage in purity, lest he be angry and you perish on the way when his anger is kindled suddenly. Happy are those who take refuge in him. We see that these two chapters actually constitute a single chapter. So you can see, right, the 12th verse of this psalm ends Ashrei kol chosevo, and it's significant, says this passage from the Talmud, that this word Ashrei is used here. I just realized I didn't share my screen.
That's all right, we listen.
Okay, so there, now you can see the 12th verse here, Ashrei, is connected to the first word of the first psalm. So maybe these two are one psalm and one unit. So as we read through the translation, I want us to be thinking about how does this relate to the first psalm, and what is going on in connecting these two psalms. All right.
Oh, there's Ashrei. Got it.
Who would like to read our first translation, which is from Robert Alter on the left-hand column of page 2 of our packet. All right, Barbie, go ahead.
I'll unmute first.
Yeah.
Why are the nations aroused and the peoples murmur vain things? Kings of the earth take their stand, and princes conspire together against the Lord and against his anointed. Let us tear off their fetters. Let us fling away their bonds. He who dwells in the heavens will laugh, and the master derides them. Then he will speak to them in his wrath. In his burning anger, dismay them. And I appointed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Let me tell as it is of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. I myself today did beget you. Ask of me, and I shall give nations as your estate, and your holdings the ends of the earth. Would you scroll up, please? Thank you. You will smash them with a rod of iron. Like a potter's jar, you will dash them. And now, O you kings, pay mind, be chastened, you rulers of earth. Worship the Lord in fear and exult in trembling. With purity be armed, lest he rage and you be lost on the way. For his wrath in a moment flares up. Happy all who shelter in him.
Okay, first reactions or thoughts to the content of the psalm or to its form.
I can't say this has to do word by word, but the sense of it to me really reflects what's going on in the world right now.
Right. Thanks. I appreciate that. Right. This psalm actually speaks in some sense to a real geopolitical approach to the world, and where Psalm 1 was a very internal approach, right? That is to say, here's an individual person who's relating to a world where there might be scoffers, but is choosing not to associate with them. Here we see that just as the individual has to deal with that choice, also nations have to deal with that choice. Nations have to deal with righteousness and justice. Nations have to understand that there's a way that is chosen or anointed by God. Okay, and when we think about the geopolitical, it feels very relevant in some way to our current political climate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing that, Mishka. Murray, I saw your hand go up.
No, I was just thinking, you mentioned in the beginning that the psalm is perhaps quoted or used more in the Christian tradition than in the Jewish liturgy. Is it because of the reference to the one and the Lord as a reason for that? But I find it a little bit contradictory when the same voice speaks about smashing and the wrath and all that, which doesn't seem to be in harmony with how the Christian view the teachings of Jesus.
Okay, I love this comment. I will say this first. I am not Christian. I am a scholar of mostly of Judaism. I've taken some classes on Christianity, but I will say this. I think that both Judaism and Christianity contain biblical quotes and references that describe God as a loving God and that describe God as a wrathful, angry God. And it isn't true, though it has been much written about, right? And some Christian scholars for many centuries said that, Christianity is a loving tradition and Judaism is a wrathful, angry tradition, or a legalistic tradition. This psalm which obviously is contained in the Hebrew scriptures, it definitely, and which is lifted up, I think, more in Christian understandings, definitely has anger as a primary emotional resonance in this song. And the anger is against those who are unloving. And I think that is an appropriate use of anger. That is to say, anger against those that do not choose to live in a way of love and justice is appropriate anger, and anger which can be channeled in both Christian and Jewish traditions. You're right that, and we're going to talk about it, that some of this, the Christian resonance in this psalm is this question of the anointed, the Mashiach, the Messiah, and this question of you are my son, I myself today have begotten you. And then in verse 12, with purity be armed is how this translates that phrase, which in Hebrew is nashku var. We're going to look at some possible translations of that phrase, which is a very, very difficult phrase to translate because it's not clear at all what it means. So let's look at another translation. Oh, are there any other comments? Gary?
Yes.
Oh, did you have a comment?
I can put it off. Do you want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead. All right. So the right-hand column of page 2, which is a translation by Rabbi Richard Levy.
Why do peoples rage? The nations connive at nonsense. The rulers of the earth rise up, and sovereigns take counsel together against Adonai, against the ruler God has anointed. Let us break the bonds with which they hold us back. Let us cast away the cords with which they would restrain us. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. Adonai is filled with scorn at them. Then God lectures them in fury, terrifying them with wrath. I myself have poured oil on the head of my ruler in Zion, the mountain that flows with my holiness. I shall speak about the statutes through which I reign. Adonai said to me, you are my child. Today I have given birth to you. And ask of me, and I will give peoples as your legacy, the ends of the earth as your holdings. You shall cast them back to chaos with a rod of iron. You shall smash them like a potter's crockery. So then, O rulers, act smartly, accept restraint, O judges of the earth. Serve Adonai in awe, rejoice but tremble. Send the eternal kisses of purity, lest fury follow you, and you perish on the way, and wrath flames suddenly against you. Happy are all who take refuge in God.
So I think the tone of this translation, yeah, Gary.
The comment was that this seems to have an I in it. There's a person speaking. It says, I speak about the statute through which I reign. Mm-hmm. And so this really sounded to me like a speech that someone was giving, in my imagination anyhow, to the soldiers, to the rank and file soldiers, saying you should be loyal to me. You've got God on your side, and I can tell you what God thinks of me. I'll tell you what God thinks of the other guys, and something like that is being said.
Nice. So great. So Gary points out that the tense of this poem, it shifts over the course of the poem. There's clearly kind of a narrator of the poem, but then there's a first-person speaker. And it's not clear exactly who the first-person speaker is, though we know about that first-person speaker that they consider themselves to be a child of God, and that they are that God's promise to the speaker is peoples and the ends of the earth, right? Or nations, okay? And so we might understand that the speaker is none other than God's anointed king. And certainly, in a traditional Jewish understanding of Psalms, where many of the Psalms are written by King David, and any psalm that isn't explicitly noted to be having been written by someone else is assumed to have been written by King David. Here, right, the speaker is understood by Jewish tradition in some sense to be King David. So that David is saying, I will speak about the statutes through which I reign, right? Why do I have authority of monarchy? It's because God appointed me as the anointed king, the anointed ruler. Do I think that this psalm necessarily had to have been written by David, or that David is the speaker of the psalm? Not necessarily, but it does seem likely, given the content of the psalm, that the author of the psalm wanted us to understand that the first person speaker was in the Davidic line, if not David himself, somebody who is anointed in that line of Davidic ancestry as the king of Israel. Other thoughts? Yeah, so let's go to the next page, page 3, and as we had last time, this page has some non-Jewish translations. Yeah, actually, let's go to page 4, to the comparison between the Christian Standard Bible and James Hamilton Jr.'s evangelical Christian translation. So that's on page 4. Would somebody like to read the one on the left?
I do.
All right, Kathy.
Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and his anointed one. Let's tear off their chains and throw their ropes off of us. The one enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord ridicules them. Then he speaks to them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will declare the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with an iron scepter. You will shatter them like pottery. So now, kings, be wise. Receive instruction, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with reverential awe and rejoice with trembling. Pay homage to the Son, or he will be angry, and you will perish in rebellion, for his anger may ignite at any moment. All who take refuge in him are happy. Well, that's different.
Yeah, so what pops out at you as being different?
Verse 12, pay homage to the Son. And then also verse 7, it sounded more like we're getting into the Son of God as defined by Christianity, not just you are my child and my son.
Yeah. Any other comments or reactions to that? Yeah, Gary.
I think that the Christianity often looks for foreshadowing, and I assume that's what is being done here. That they look for. Honestly, I don't understand exactly why they do this, but they look to the ancient Jewish traditions and Jewish texts to find foreshadowing of the coming of Jesus. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's being done here. And there's no reason to expect that in other respects, the sort of contradiction between, this angry God picture is just an issue of the timing. This was written, long before the time of Jesus. There's no reason it should have been a part of the Christian tradition at all, except for this foreshadowing idea.
Well, yes, and right, Christian scriptures do include much of Hebrew scriptures, even though the in the context of the Christian Bible they are sometimes reordered and certainly refocused. But you're absolutely right that there is a tradition of looking for prefigurations of Christ in Hebrew scriptures. That's another way of saying foreshadowing. For example, the story that's gonna come in this week's Torah portion of the binding of Isaac, right? That Isaac's near-death experience prefigures in Christian theology the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And certainly there is, right, if the lens through which you read Hebrew scripture is the truth of Christian scripture, then all over the place you're going to find aspects of Hebrew scriptures that seem to directly speak to the truth of Christian scripture. And you're absolutely right, this psalm, which doesn't have to be referring to Jesus, it's clear how you could read this as referring to Jesus. After all, right, Jesus is understood in Christianity as being in that anointed line of Davidic ancestry and the king of the Jews, and right, understood to be, at least by Matthew, in that direct Davidic descent, right? And the word Christ means Mashiach. It means anointed, right? It is the word Christ is the Greek word for like anointed, to pour oil on. The Hebrew translation of the word Christ is Mashiach. And so when you have this word, Al Adonai v'al Mishicho, on God and on God's anointed, and you're reading from a Christian perspective, who could it possibly be the anointed of God other than Jesus? It seems obvious in that context.
Yeah, I want to make two other quick comments. One, I think it's also possible you could look at the author of this psalm as writing about a still more ancient tradition in which kings are, in which political kings are descendants of God.
Great. Yeah, of course.
And
even up until the 19th and 20th centuries, monarchs claimed not just the divine right of kings, but in many places in the world also divine, not just divine approval,
divine right,
but also a certain kind of divine ancestry, lineage. Sure.
And the other thing I just wanted, it's the same point I was making just a second ago. At some point, Christianity became essentially a Gentile religion. And it's hard for me to understand why at that point they still felt this need to make a very strong connection with the ancient Jewish traditions.
Well, they weren't that ancient. I think you're right, From a historical perspective, Christianity Christianity develops first as a sect of Judaism and then primarily as a Gentile religion. Okay, but all of that happens in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, and Judaism also undergoes a complete radical shift in that time period, where it goes from being a centralized worship in Jerusalem to being a decentralized religion where the focus is on Torah study as opposed to on the sacrificial system. You could just as easily say that it's surprising that the rabbinic tradition, like the Talmud, needed to keep the Hebrew scriptures, as much as you could say that it's surprising that the Christian Bible needed to keep the Hebrew scriptures. I think what you see there is that the people in the 1st and 2nd century, they didn't see it as super ancient text. They saw it as holy writ. It was a part of their tradition, even though these books were earlier. And the latest books of Hebrew scriptures like Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah only are written and put into the canon just in the last couple hundred years before the Common Era. So you're only talking about a couple hundred years difference, and so how ancient are these? The difference in the time period, say when the book of 2 Maccabees, which doesn't make it into the Hebrew scriptures, but does make it into the Christian Bible, book of 2 Maccabees is written probably in the 1st century of the Common Era, which is also probably when Matthew was written. So the difference in timing is very small. So that's one part of it. Yeah. All right, let's read the James Hamilton's interpretation of the psalm, and then I'd like to look specifically at that phrase, some of these phrases that are interpreted differently in Christian translations than in Jewish ones, and look at that. James, did you want to read?
Sure. Why do the nations rage and the peoples meditate vanity? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers gather together against Yahweh and against his Messiah. Let us tear apart their bonds and cast from us their ropes. The one who sits in the heavens laughs. My Lord mocks them. Then he will speak to them in his wrath, and in his fury he will terrify them. As for me, I have installed my king on Zion, the mountain of my holiness. I will recount the decrees of Yahweh. He said to me, my son, I today have begotten you. Ask for me, and I will give the nations as your inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron, shatter them like a potter's vessel. And now, O kings, cause yourself to be wise. Receive correction, O judges of the earth. Serve Yahweh in fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath flares quickly. Blessed are all who take refuge in him.
It's clearly Christian.
Yeah, so, okay, it does feel Christian to us in our Jewish context, and it is, right? He is writing spiritual, theological, evangelical Christian versions of the Psalms. I will say, I think it's really interesting that he also understands nashku to be kiss, okay, as opposed to be pay homage, okay, and you'll notice right up here that we had with purity be armed, and here we had send the eternal kisses of purity. And so, right, it's clear that there's different ways of understanding what the word nashku means. Is it neshek, like armament? Like if you say in modern Hebrew, if you tell somebody don't forget your neshek, you mean don't forget your gun. Okay, but the word nishika means kiss, and so, right, what does it mean here? Does it mean armament or does it mean kiss? And then, and what does bar mean? Does bar mean eternal? Does bar mean the sun? Right. So here, in Walter Brueggemann translates nashkuvar as kiss his feet. Kiss his feet. All right. So again, the neshek there, the kiss, but people don't know how to translate this. So let's look at some of my commentaries. All right. So you can see I brought on page 5 some of the stuff about Mashiach. We'll look at that in a second. But let's go to the last page where I brought 2 biblical commentaries on Nashkuvar. One is from Rashi. That's Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, 10th and 11th century France. And then the Radak, who is, I think 12th century or 13th century Spain. I'll have to look that up. So Rashi says, Nashkuvar, this is the last couple comments on page 6. Arm yourselves with purity. He says it means arm yourself with purity of the heart. Some explain nashku as garnement. So if you speak Old French, that will mean a lot to you. Garnement means to equip. Okay, this is from the verb garnir. Okay, so garnement means to provide, and then he gives another verse from Genesis 41 where it's used that same verb. But Menachem interprets it instead as an expression of desire, as in Genesis chapter 3, the Elishech teshukatech vehu yimshol bach, your longing shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So there, teshukatech, longing. That's the meaning of the word when it relates to being kissed. So, and then there's also this question of bar. Is bar here? Rashi understands bar to mean purity, because the word like the word bar can mean sort of clear. Like if you describe a pane of glass as bar, it means transparent. And so here, like bar might mean purity, as in purity of the heart. So we have a name, actually, an Aramaic name that means this. Bruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, is named Bruria, and her name comes from this root, bari, bar, meaning pure. And if you look up in a dictionary of names and what names mean, you'll find Bruria under purity. So, okay, so arm yourselves with purity, right? So the Radak says Nashkuvar means kiss the sun. Now the Radak is a Jewish rabbi. Okay, he's not a Christian scholar. So it's not just Christians who understand bar to mean that, right? And here bar is like bar mitzvah, right? What is bar mitzvah? Bar mitzvah is the son of the commandments, right, who has reached the age of mitzvot. Literally, bar means son. So, as in the verse, he kissed all his brethren. Again, like the intertext to try to understand what the word means. And the word bar is the same as ben. And so, what my son and also what, O son of my womb? And so he's quoting from Proverbs, where the word bar is used to mean son. And it connects, of course, to earlier in the Psalm where God is saying, Amare lai bini ata, right? So it connects there, right? If God is saying, you are my son, then nashku bar, maybe the bar is also referring to son. Okay, kiss. So if the meaning is son, then this will be its interpretation. Kiss this son whom God has called son, as God says above, thou art my son. And the command is kiss, because the custom for a servant is to kiss the hand of the master. And if its meaning is pure, its interpretation is, what have I to do with you? For I am pure in heart, and there is no wickedness in me, that you should come and fight against me. Your duty is to kiss me and to confess that I am the king by the command of God. And bar may also be fittingly interpreted from the verse, choose you a man for you. So bar might actually mean to choose. And then there are two verses from Samuel where the king of God is described as the chosen, both of the people, right? Choose a man from among you to be the king. That's the first one. And then also Saul is the chosen of the Lord, God, the one that God chooses. So the king, the anointed one, is both the chosen of the people and the chosen of God. Yeah, Henry.
So we do this today in a way when we are called to the Torah and we kiss the word, the Torah at the place where the reading is taking place.
Right, exactly. When we march the Torah around and people kiss it, it's reminiscent of the custom of approaching the ruler and kissing the ruler. And in fact, that is part of the idea. That's also why we stand when the Torah is standing, is because we treat the Torah with that same kind of dignity that we would treat sort of a monarch. And so, yes, absolutely. Natalie, are you speaking to us? No,
Sorry?
you might be just talking to somebody else.
Please.
Yeah, Murray.
A slightly different question. I'm frequently, I don't know whether humbled or baffled when reading, studying the Torah and the liturgy in trying to imagine or visualize God, the divine being that speaks to the humans and that directs and gives the authority and anoints, etc. Because so many of these passages are described in also anthropomorphic terms, that with God being just the highest authority above all these kings, us ordinary humans, our rulers, and then above there is that one being that makes it all happen or allows it all to happen. And so the question that I have is, how do we try to understand the nature of God in these teachings?
Yeah, I think this, Murray, this question about understanding the nature of God in this psalm goes back to your question about anger and violence, right? Like, on the one hand, there's a certain connection to the topic of the psalm with the possible translation that Radak is talking about with regard to kissing the anointed ruler. And on the other hand, the translation where it's about arm yourself with purity, or right, like have this violent, also sort of speaks to some of the other violent imagery or aspects of this psalm. And certainly the God that is described here is a God that is ready for God's anointed one to smash God's enemies. It's a very angry, violent God, and a God that's described very much with a lot of anthropomorphism. So a couple of thoughts about that. One is, right, there are clearly voices in biblical scripture that believe that God has a body, even though our Jewish tradition says that God has no body, right? The biblical texts clearly, many of them do not imagine a monotheism that is a formless God. And so in some respects, like if you ask a Maimonidean, Maimonides would tell you, nope, every reference to God's body is anthropomorphism, and it's a metaphor. But there clearly were voices before the Rambam, before Maimonides, that understood God's body in a much more literal sense than is reflective of our, of our current understanding or our current belief. And the other thing that I would say is, regardless of whether God has a body or not, how we describe God and the language that we use speaks to our understanding of God's role in the world and what God should be doing. And this psalm and the previous psalm, right, and maybe they're one unit, these psalms do describe a God who is choosing the righteous and saving the righteous, and the wicked are going to perish utterly, right? We talked about last week whether that meant wicked people were going to perish utterly or wickedness was going to perish utterly. But clearly there's a voice that describes this complete and utter annihilation of the wicked. And that's also present in this week's psalm. Natalie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, just the event that we put crowns on our Torah to indicate they are. It is a monarch. It is a leader. And we emphasize that the Torah is, when we kiss the Torah, we are kissing the king.
Yeah, right. And in some ways, the Torah is a physical object that lets us have some veneration also of God. Yeah. Beautiful. Gary.
Just along those same lines, when we process the Torah through the congregation, we recite, we in effect refer to the people in the procession as B'nai Elim, as the children of the gods or something. I think, and even though we're not thinking that, that's the way it's expressed.
Nice. And we'll get to that when we get to that psalm. Yeah. Right. That is a verse from Psalms, which we sing at that time. Good. So I love all of the connections to our spiritual practice, to our lived liturgical rites. I will say that as far as I am aware, no one is sourcing the customs of how to behave around the Torah to this psalm. Okay, so while there are sort of connections, I don't think that anybody says, oh, like Psalm 2 says, you're supposed to kiss the king. So that's why we kiss the Torah when the Torah walks around. But there is a custom that does directly come from this psalm. And I did bring that. And it's from verse 11, Ivdu et Adonai biyirah, serve God with trembling. And it's from the Talmud Bavli from the section that deals with blessings. And it says, Rabbi Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that it can be derived from this verse, serve the Lord in fear and rejoice in trembling. Having cited this verse from Psalms, the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of rejoice with trembling? Because there's also a verse in Psalms that says, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, serve God with joy, right? And so this verse, Ivdu et Adonai b'yirah, serve God with trembling, that is serve God in fear. That feels very different from serving God with joy. Oh, so Rav Ada Bar Matana said that Rabbah said, one may not experience unbridled joy. Even when there is rejoicing, there should be trembling. On that note, the Gemara relates, Abaye was sitting before his teacher Rabbah, and Rabbah saw that he was excessively joyful. He said to Abaye, it is written, rejoice with trembling. One's joy should not be unrestrained. Abaye said to him, it is permissible for me because I'm donning phylacteries right now, right? I'm wearing tefillin. And as long as the tefillin are on me, they ensure that I have the fear of God on me. So in other words, there's an anxiety among these rabbis that pure joy will lead you to forget God. If you experience ecstasy, if you experience something that is completely unrestrained, that experience is itself a kind of idolatry, because in that moment of pure bliss, you have forgotten the sanctity and seriousness of the divine. And so Abaye is able to say, no, yes, I'm joyful, but because I have the tefillin on me, I'm not going to be untethered. I'm not going to lose myself in the joy. I'm going to still remember God, even with joy. Similarly, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting before Rabbi Zera. He saw that Rabbi Yirmiyah was excessively joyful. He said to him, it is written, in all sorrow there is profit. Sorrow is appropriate, not excessive joy. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to him, it's permissible for me because I am donning phylacteries, right? I'm wearing tefillin, so it's okay for me to be joyful. Right. On a similar note, the Gemara relates, Mar, the son of Ravina, made a wedding feast for his son, and he saw the sages were excessively joyous. He brought a valuable cup worth 400 zuz and broke it before them, and they became sad, right? And so there's this very strong tradition, a very strong custom that happens at most Jewish weddings, everyone I've ever been to, where in a Jewish wedding, you have to break a cup. And the idea of breaking this cup is, in fact, to remind you not to be excessively joyful. And you're supposed to break a cup with some value, like that you're sad that the cup was broken. And this is where it comes from. It comes from this psalm, right? The custom of breaking a cup at a Jewish wedding, stomping on the glass at the end of the ceremony. That custom comes from this passage in the Talmud, which is related to this verse in the Psalms that is about serving God with fear and rejoicing with trembling. That you shouldn't ever be so joyful that you forget that there's also brokenness in the world. So that custom comes right from this psalm.
Does this mean we have to stop saying Mazel Tov after that happens?
Oh, no. It's perfectly fine to say Mazel Tov. And of course, right, this is how things change, right? Like now, that cup is not usually a cup that's worth a lot of money. It's just, it's more symbolic than anything else. And, there are actually like these really beautiful kits that you can get where you buy a colorful cup and a glass tube, and you can collect the broken shards and stick them in the glass tube, and send them in, and they'll like fuse them together and make a mezuzah that you can then put up on the doorpost of your house together with, you know, the married couple. And then you're taking this like thing that you bought that's like a colorful cup and making it into a beautiful symbol of your home together. And so that every time you walk through that doorway in your house, you'll remember your wedding. So, which I think is a beautiful thought, beautiful idea. But this is where it comes from. It comes from this idea that you should be trembling, rejoicing with trembling, that there's a real rabbinic anxiety in the Talmud that too much joy might not be a good thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I did want to share with you that I looked up my Jewish annotated New Testament I looked up whether there were any references to Psalm 2 in the Christian scriptures, and indeed there is a reference to Psalm 2 in the book of Acts, which is one of the books of the Christian Bible. In chapter 13, verse 33, Acts directly quotes Psalm 2. He has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising Jesus. As also it is written in the second Psalm, you are my son, today I have begotten you. So the book of Acts, which I think is one of the Pauline letters. I'm not 100% sure. The book of Acts, let's see. The book of Acts it's the first book of the Bible after of the New Testament after the four apostles, the four big books, and then this is the first one. And scholars think that it's really connected to the book of Luke. Anyway, so I was wrong when I first said that about Paul. Okay. It's not one of the letters. Anyway, the point is the book of Acts, like many New Testament books, directly quotes from previous Hebrew scripture, and in chapter 13 evokes this line from Psalm 2 and explicitly suggests that it's referring to Jesus. Which when we read it and we read the Christian translations and we saw one that had a capital S-O-N, we were like, oh, it seems like they might be referring to Jesus in that way. And that is not unique to the translators, the Christian translators of this psalm, and in fact is a very ancient practice to understand the psalm that way. Already in the book of Acts, it was understood that way.
Do we know how old the Psalms are?
So the answer to that is no. We know that they are all old and that there are definitely ones that are older and ones that are newer. I will keep my eyes on that question with respect to, as I'm preparing, if there's any, relative dating, I'll let you know. I have to admit, I don't know. But I can say, like I said last week, there's a strong sense that the first Psalm may have been written specifically to introduce the book of Psalms. And so it's possible that Psalm was later. If the Talmud is right, that this is actually a part of that Psalm, that it's one unit, which it may or may not be the case that that's true in how it was written, then I think, you know, it's likely to be a fairly late psalm. But the whole book of Psalms was canonized 200 or 300 years before the Common Era, at least. At least that's my understanding. Yeah, there's definitely sections of Psalms, like the section of Psalms that we read that we call Hallel, like that was a literary unit that just got plunked into the book of Psalms. And there are several things like that, where it's clear that these set of 6 Psalms or these set of 7 Psalms were a unit together, and then they got put into the book of Psalms as a unit. And I imagine that there were Psalms that didn't make it into the book of Psalms. And it is also possible that at a certain point there was a tradition that 150 Psalms are in the book of Psalms, but they might have been a different 150 for a little while. Like different people may have had slightly different versions of the Psalms. All right, we've reached our time boundary. So you can read my selections from the book of Daniel and from Psalm 132, which also relate to the idea of God's anointed, and suggest that it doesn't have to necessarily be Jesus, but any king in the Davidic line. Other Jewish approaches to understanding that phrase. All right, thank you, everybody. The next time this class will meet will be January 17th.
Can't think that far ahead.
Yep, Tuesday, January 17th, because I'm going to be on family leave between now and then. And it was a pleasure to study with you. And of course, send me any emails if you have any remaining thoughts.
Everything should be well.
Yes.
May we hear good news.
Thank you.
Amen.
Yes.
Soon.
As soon as is right.
Exactly.